The ink from my Mont Blanc pen was still wet on the contract when the memory hit me. It wasn't a memory of triumph, even though I had just secured the acquisition of a logistics firm that would push my company, Sterling Tech, into the Fortune 500. No, the memory that clawed its way up my throat was the smell of damp earth and the sound of a preacher's voice that I had never met. I stood up from my mahogany desk, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window of my Manhattan penthouse. The city lights below looked like spilled diamonds, a stark contrast to the darkness that had lived inside me for 15 years. I opened the drawer of my desk. Inside, beneath a stack of high-priority legal briefs, was a yellowing printout of a newspaper clipping from the Oak Brook Gazette. It was dated 12 years ago, 3 years I had left home. In loving memory of Elizabeth Ann Sterling, beloved daughter, taken too soon, a private service was held by the family. They had buried me. Not literally, of course. I was alive, breathing, and fighting my way through business school on scholarships and waitressing tips at the time. But to the town of Oak Brook, to the neighbors, and to the extended family, Elizabeth Sterling was dead. They told everyone it was a drug overdose, a tragic accident of a rebellious, ungrateful child who couldn't handle the real world. They held a funeral for an empty casket. They accepted casseroles and sympathy cards. They probably even squeezed out a few fake tears while standing over a hole in the ground that contained absolutely nothing. My hand trembled slightly as I held the paper. I remembered the night I left. I was 19. I had refused to marry the son of my father's business partner, a man 10 years my senior who smelled of stale bourbon and entitlement. My father, Richard Sterling, had thrown my suitcase down the front steps in the pouring rain. "If you walk out that door," he had roared, his face purple with rage, "you are dead to this family. You are dead to this town. I will not have a daughter who is a failure and a disappointment." My mother, Catherine, had stood in the doorway, clutching her pearls, looking at me not with love, but with the cold calculation of a woman who had just lost a bargaining chip. "Go then," she had sneered. "See how long you survive without our money." I survived. I thrived. I built an empire out of the stones they threw at me. But the scar of that obituary never faded. It was the ultimate erasure. They didn't just disown me. They killed my memory so they wouldn't have to explain why their daughter hated them. My phone buzzed on the glass desktop, shattering the silence. I frowned. It was my personal number, the one almost nobody had. I looked at the screen. The area code was from Oak Brook. The name stored in the contact list was simply Birthgiver. I hadn't heard from her in 15 years. Not when I graduated top of my class, not when my first startup made headlines, not even when Forbes listed me as a billionaire last week. I slid my finger across the screen to open the message. "Come home. Christmas Eve dinner, 7 p.m. Urgent family matter. Don't be late. Mom." No hello. No how are you. No I'm sorry we told the world you were dead. Just a command, as if I were still that frightened 19-year-old girl standing in the rain. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. It was a dry, humorless sound. They didn't know who they were texting. They thought they were summoning a prodigal daughter. They didn't realize they were inviting the executioner. I sat back down, the leather of my chair creaking. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a sudden, surging adrenaline. Why now? After 15 years of silence, why demand my presence for Christmas Eve? I picked up my office phone and dialed a 3-digit extension. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. "Get the jet ready. We're going to Oak Brook. And bring the red file." "The red file, Elizabeth?" Arthur Vance's voice was calm, professional. He was my general counsel, my oldest ally, and the only person who knew the full extent of my history. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I replied, staring at the text message one last time. "They want a family reunion. I think it's time I gave them one they'll never forget." I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. The woman staring back wasn't the girl who cried in a motel room for a week. She was a shark, and she smelled blood in the water. This wasn't an invitation, it was a summons to a reckoning. The morning after the text message, I sat in my conference room with Arthur. The view of the Hudson River was gray and choppy, matching the storm brewing inside me. But on the surface, I was ice. This is what people don't understand about trauma. Eventually, the tears stop, and the math begins. This was my snap moment, the moment the hurt child died and the CEO took over. I wasn't going home to beg for love. I was going to conduct a hostile takeover. Arthur Vance, a man who wore three-piece suits like armor and knew where every financial skeleton in New York was buried, slid a thick dossier across the polished table. "You were right to be suspicious, Elizabeth," Arthur said, opening his iPad. "I ran a full forensic audit on your father's assets overnight. It's worse than we thought." I opened the dossier. The numbers were bleeding red. "Tell me," I said, sipping my black coffee. "Sterling Manufacturing is effectively a corpse," Arthur explained, pointing to a graph that plummeted like a stone. "Your father, Richard, has been cooking the books for 5 years. He's leveraged everything: the factory, the equipment, even the company vehicles." "And the house?" I asked. "The sprawling Victorian mansion in Oakbrook that had been in the Sterling family for 4 generations. The house where I was raised and where I was erased." "Heavily mortgaged," Arthur said grimly. "Second and third liens. But here is the interesting part. The debt isn't held by a bank anymore. The bank bundled the toxic assets and sold them off 3 months ago to a private holding firm." I looked at him, my eyebrow raised. "Who bought it?" Arthur smiled, a shark-like grin that mirrored my own. "Vanguard Holdings." I set my coffee cup down slowly. A cold satisfaction spread through my chest. "Vanguard Holdings. That's one of our shell companies, a subsidiary of Phoenix Capital." "Correct," Arthur nodded. "Technically, Elizabeth, you own their debt. You own the mortgage on their house. You own the loans on their business. You even own the outstanding balance on your mother's Neiman Marcus credit card, which, I might add, is astronomical." I stared at the papers. The irony was so rich I could taste it. For 15 years, they had acted like the royalty of Oakbrook, living off the prestige of the Sterling name while secretly drowning. And the daughter they declared dead? I was the invisible hand holding the rope that kept them from sinking, or the rope that could hang them. "They don't know, do they?" I asked. "No," Arthur replied. "Vanguard is opaque. As far as Richard knows, he owes money to a faceless corporation in Delaware. He has no idea the CEO is his daughter." I stood up and began to pace the room. The text message from my mother suddenly made perfect sense. Urgent family matter. "They're insolvent," I realized aloud. "They're on the brink of foreclosure. They didn't call me because they miss me. They called me because they saw the Forbes list." "Precisely," Arthur said. "They need a bailout. They need a billionaire. They're going to try to guilt you into saving the family legacy." I walked over to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. I wrote the word family in big, bold letters. Then I drew a red line through it. "This isn't business, Arthur," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "This is a resurrection. They want a ghost? I'll give them a ghost. But ghosts haunt people." "What is the plan?" Arthur asked, closing his folder. "We go to dinner," I said, turning back to him, "but we don't go as guests. Prepare the foreclosure notice, prepare the fraud evidence regarding the insurance policy. We'll get to that later. I want everything legally binding and ready to execute the moment dessert is served." I thought about my brother, Preston. He would be there too, the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. Last I heard, he was 30 years old and still finding himself on our parents' dime. And Aunt Linda, the town gossip who had gleefully spread the rumors of my overdose to cover up the family shame. They were all complicit. They were a collective organism of narcissism and greed, feeding off each other. "One more thing," Arthur said, his tone softening slightly. "Your grandmother, Rose." I froze. Grandma Rose, the only person in that house who had ever shown me kindness. She used to sneak me cookies when my mother put me on diets I didn't need. She was the one who slipped a crumpled $100 bill into my pocket the night I was kicked out. "What about her?" I asked, a lump forming in my throat. "She's still alive," Arthur said. "But according to the medical records I pulled, the family has declared her mentally incompetent. They have power of attorney over her. They've restricted her access to the phone and visitors." My blood ran cold. Then it boiled. "They've imprisoned her," I whispered. "It appears so," Arthur said, "likely to control her pension and Social Security." That was the final straw. If I had any lingering doubts, any tiny shred of hesitation about destroying my parents, it evaporated in that second. They had taken the only pure thing in that house and locked it away. "Get the car," I said, grabbing my purse. It was a Birkin, worth more than my father's car. "We're not just going to collect a debt, Arthur. We're going on a rescue mission." The snap was complete. I wasn't Elizabeth the victim anymore. I was Elizabeth the Avenger, and I was bringing the receipts. The Gulfstream G650 sliced through the clouds, leaving New York far behind. I sat in the cream-colored leather seat, swirling a glass of sparkling water, staring out at the endless blue. Across from me, Arthur was reviewing documents, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. The luxury surrounding me, the soft cashmere throw, the silent cabin, the attentive flight attendant, felt like a protective barrier. It was the armor I had built for myself. But as we began our descent toward the small regional airport near Oak Brook, I felt that armor cracking, not from weakness, but from rage. I closed my eyes and let a flashback wash over me. I was 10 years old. I was sitting on the back porch steps, crying because my mother had told me I wasn't pretty enough for the pageant. Grandma Rose had come out, smelling of lavender and old paper. She sat beside me, her joints creaking. "Don't you listen to her, Lizzie," she had whispered, tucking a stray hair behind my ear. "Some flowers bloom in the spring, flashy and loud, but you're an oak tree. You take longer to grow, but when the storm comes, the flowers die, the oak stands." She had pressed a small, hard candy into my hand. "You stand, Lizzie. You hear me? You stand." I opened my eyes, the memories sharp as glass. "Arthur," I said, breaking the silence of the cabin. "How much did Richard steal from her?" Arthur didn't look up from the file. Based on the bank statements, he drained her savings account 4 years ago, approximately $200,000. He claimed it was for home renovations to accommodate her care, but there are no permits, no contractor invoices. The money went to pay off interest on his personal loans and to lease a new Porsche for Preston. I gripped the glass so hard I thought it might shatter. "He bought a sports car with my grandmother's life savings while locking her in a room?" "It appears so," Arthur said calmly. He was the perfect counterbalance to my fury. He provided the facts, I provided the fire, and there's the matter of the life insurance policy on you. "The fake funeral," I muttered. "Yes," Arthur said. "I pulled the claim. Liberty Mutual paid out $500,000 12 years ago. Beneficiaries, Richard and Catherine Sterling. Cause of death listed, cardiac arrest, secondary to overdose. They had a corrupt coroner sign the death certificate. That's a federal crime, Elizabeth. Wire fraud, insurance fraud." I looked out the window as the landing gear deployed with a mechanical thud. The landscape below was brown and gray, the Midwest in winter. "They sold my life," I said softly. "They literally sold my life for $500,000. And they spent it all," Arthur added. "That money is long gone." The plane touched down, the tires screeching against the tarmac. It felt like a violent return to a past I had tried to outrun. A black SUV was waiting for us on the tarmac. As I stepped off the plane, the cold wind hit me. It was the same biting wind I remembered from that night I left, but I wasn't shivering this time. I was wearing a trench coat that cost more than my mother's entire wardrobe. We got into the SUV. "Take us to the Sterling estate," I told the driver, "but take the long way. Go through town." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Nostalgia?" "Reconnaissance," I corrected. "I want to see the kingdom before I burn it down." We drove through Main Street. It was sadder than I remembered. Empty storefronts, for lease signs. And yet there were still the familiar landmarks. The diner where I worked, the high school. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my mother. Wear something appropriate. No ripped jeans. The Hendersons might stop by. I looked down at my tailored trousers and silk blouse. The delusion was breathtaking. She still thought I was the struggling dropout. She had no concept of who was coming for dinner. Arthur, I said, watching the town pass by. When we get there, I need you to stay in the car initially. I need to go in alone first. I need to see them unfiltered. I need to see Grandma Rose before we drop the hammer.
Risky, Arthur advised. If they are hostile, they won't be hostile physically, I said. They're cowards. They use words and guilt. I can handle that. Just be ready with the briefcase when I signal. What is the signal? I smiled, a cold, dangerous smile, when I ask for the check. The car turned onto the road leading to the wealthy district. The houses got bigger, the lawns larger. But as we approached 42 Elm Street, I noticed the decay. The fence was peeling. The grand oak tree in the front yard, my tree, looked sick. We pulled up a block away. I didn't want them to see the car yet. Ready? Arthur asked. I took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of the cold, hard woman I had become. I've been ready for 15 years. I stepped out of the car. My heels clicked on the pavement, a rhythmic beat of war drums. I was walking toward my own funeral, but this time I was the one holding the shovel. The walk to the house was surreal. The winter sun was setting, casting long, skeletal shadows across the street. I passed the house of Mrs. Higgins, our old neighbor. She was out on her porch, sweeping away dead leaves, wrapped in a knitted shawl. Mrs. Higgins had always been the town's unofficial broadcaster. If you sneezed at 9 a.m., Mrs. Higgins knew you had the flu by 9:05 a.m. I stopped at her gate. I couldn't resist. Good evening, Mrs. Higgins, I called out, my voice projecting clearly in the crisp air. She looked up, squinting through her thick glasses. Then she froze. Her broom clattered to the wooden porch floor. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked as if she had seen a specter. Elizabeth, she wheezed, clutching her chest. Elizabeth Sterling? In the flesh, I said, resting my hand on the gate. But you're dead, she stammered, taking a step back, visibly terrified. Your mother said, the overdose, the service. I made a tuna casserole. I felt a flash of anger at the mention of the overdose. It was such a lazy, stereotypical lie to tell about a teenager who just wanted independence. Rumors of my death were greatly exaggerated, Mrs. Higgins, I said smoothly. I didn't die in an alley. I went to New York. I started a company. I'm quite alive. She stared at me, taking in my appearance. My hair was professionally styled, my skin glowed from expensive treatments, and the diamond studs in my ears caught the fading light. I didn't look like a junkie. I looked like I owned the bank that held her mortgage. But why? She whispered. Why did they say? Because it was easier than admitting I left them, I said, my voice hardening. It's easier to be the grieving parents of a tragedy than the failed parents of a runaway. Mrs. Higgins looked toward the Sterling house, then back to me. The gears in her mind were turning. She was realizing she had been duped for a decade. I'm going to see them now, I said. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Higgins. Merry Christmas, Elizabeth, she murmured, still in shock. I walked away, leaving her standing there. By tomorrow morning, the whole town would know I was alive. The narrative was already shifting. I reached the driveway of my childhood home. Up close, the neglect was even more obvious. The shutters were crooked. The garden was overgrown with weeds that had died in the frost. It was a house that was trying desperately to keep up appearances, but failing. I walked up the steps. The wood creaked under my feet, the same creak I used to try and avoid when sneaking out at night. I didn't knock. I still had my key. I had kept it on my keychain for 15 years, a heavy reminder of where I came from. I wasn't sure if it would still work, or if they had changed the locks. I slid the key into the brass mechanism.
It turned with a stiff click. They hadn't changed the locks. Of course not. That would cost money. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped into the foyer. The smell hit me instantly, a mix of lemon polish, old dust, and that specific cloying perfume my mother always wore. It smelled like repression. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. Then the sound of heels clicking on the hardwood floor. My mother, Catherine Sterling, appeared from the living room. She was wearing a red velvet dress that was slightly too tight, her hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde perfection. But her face, time had not been kind. Her mouth was pinched in a permanent frown, and her eyes were anxious. She stopped when she saw me. There was no joy, no relief, no tears of happiness. She scanned me from head to toe, assessing my value like an appraiser looking at a piece of furniture.
"You're late," she said. That was her opening line. Not, "I missed you," just, "You're late." "Hello, Mother," I said, keeping my hands in my pockets. I didn't offer a hug. I knew she wouldn't want to wrinkle her dress. "We said 7, she snapped, checking her watch. "It's 7:15. Richard hates waiting." She finally looked at my face. "You look different. Older." "It's been 15 years, Catherine. People age." Her eyes darted to my Birkin bag. I saw the greed flare in her pupils for a microsecond before she masked it. "Is that real?" she asked, pointing a manicured nair at the bag. "It's real," I said. "Well," she sniffed, turning around. "Don't just stand there letting the cold air in. Come into the drawing room. Your father is pouring drinks."
And try not to upset him. His blood pressure is high. I closed the door behind me. I looked at the walls of the foyer. Usually, families have photos, graduation photos, wedding photos. There were photos of Preston playing baseball, Preston graduating high school. There were photos of Richard shaking hands with local politicians. There was not a single trace of me. I had been effectively photoshopped out of existence. I felt a coldness settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. I wasn't a daughter returning home. I was a stranger walking into a museum dedicated to a lie. "Coming, Mother," I said, my voice dripping with hidden sarcasm. I followed her into the lion's den, but she didn't realize that I wasn't Becray anymore. I was the hunter, and I had brought the ammunition. The drawing room was exactly as I remembered it. Overstuffed furniture, heavy drapes that blocked out the light, and a fireplace that smoked slightly. My father, Richard Sterling, stood by the wet bar. He was balding now, his stomach straining against his crisp white shirt, but he still held himself with that pompous air of a man who believes he is the king of his tiny, crumbling kingdom. Preston, my Yenhogather, was sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even look up when I walked in. He was 30, but he looked like an overgrown teenager, soft features, petulant mouth, wearing a designer sweater that I knew he couldn't afford. And there was Aunt Linda, sitting in the corner armchair, swirling a glass of Chardonnay. Linda, the woman who used to tell the neighbors I was troubled whenever I got an A- instead of an A. "She's here," Catherine announced, gesturing to me as if presenting a slightly disappointing centerpiece. Richard turned slowly. He swirled the ice in his scotch. He looked me in the eye, attempting to use the same intimidation glare that used to make me cower when I was a child. "Elizabeth," he said. His voice was gravelly. "You decided to show up." "You invited me, Richard," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. He bristled at the use of his first name. "It's father to you." "I think we forfeited those titles a long time ago," I said, walking further into the room but refusing to sit down. "Hello, Preston, Aunt Linda." Preston finally looked up. His eyes widened slightly when he saw my coat and bag. "Whoa, Liz, you look expensive." "Hi, Lizzie," Linda chirped, her voice fake sweet. "We were just saying we barely recognized you from the pictures on the internet. Filters do wonders these days, don't they?" The backhanded compliment landed softly. I didn't flinch. "I don't use filters, Linda," I said. "Just good dermatologists." "So," Richard interrupted, stepping forward. He didn't offer me a drink. We heard you've been doing, well, some sort of computer business? Logistics and supply chain AI, I corrected. Right.
Computers, he dismissed it. Well, don't think just because you have a little job in the city that you can come in here and look down on us. This house, this family, is the bedrock you came from. The bedrock I was kicked off of, I reminded him. We taught you resilience, Richard boomed, his face flushing red. If I hadn't pushed you out, you'd be nothing. You'd be waiting tables at the diner. You should be thanking me. The gaslighting was breathtaking. He was rewriting history in real time. He wasn't the villain who abandoned his child. He was the tough love guru who forged her success. Is that how you see it? I asked quietly. It's the truth, Catherine chimed in, picking up a tray of stale crackers. We did what we had to do. You were out of control. I refused to marry a drunk, I said. He was a partner at the firm, Richard shouted. He could have saved. He was a good match. Is that why we're here? I cut to the chase. To reminisce about your failed matchmaking? Or is there a family matter to discuss? Richard cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. The aggression shifted instantly to a slick salesman persona. It was jarring to watch. We'll discuss business at dinner, he said. First, we need to reestablish the bond. We are a family after all. Blood is thicker than water. Where is Grandma Rose? I asked abruptly. The room went silent. Preston shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Catherine looked at Richard. Grandmother is resting, Catherine said quickly. She's not well, Elizabeth. Her mind, she's very confused. She likely won't recognize you. I want to see her, I said. It's not a good idea, Richard said, stepping in my path. She gets agitated. We keep her in her room for her own safety. I want to see her, I repeated, my voice dropping to a command. Now, or I leave, and you can forget whatever business you wanted to discuss. They exchanged looks. They needed me. They needed the money they thought I had. They couldn't risk me walking out yet. Fine, Richard spat. But don't upset her, and don't believe a word she says. She makes up stories. Dementia is a terrible thing. I'll be the judge of that, I said. I turned and walked toward the hallway leading to the back of the house, the guest quarters. Or at least, that's what it used to be. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I knew they were lying. Arthur's report said they had declared her incompetent, but Arthur didn't know Rose like I did. Rose was sharp as a tack. If she was playing crazy, it was a survival tactic. I reached the door at the end of the hall. It was locked from the outside, a simple slide bolt like you'd use on a shed. Rage flared in my chest. They locked her in like an animal. I slid the bolt back and opened the door. The room was small and smelled of stale air. The curtains were drawn. Sitting in a rocking chair by the window, wrapped in 3 layers of blankets, was a tiny, frail woman. She looked so small, so fragile. Grandma? I whispered. She stopped rocking. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were cloudy, but as they locked onto mine, a spark ignited. She raised a trembling finger to her lips. Shh, she hissed. She pointed to the door. I stepped inside and closed it softly behind me. As soon as the latch clicked, the dementia vanished from her face. She sat up straighter. Took you long enough, Lizzie, she whispered, her voice rasping but clear. I thought I was going to die in this damn chair before you got here. Tears pricked my eyes. I rushed over and knelt beside her, burying my face in her wool blanket. I'm here, Grandma. I'm here. She stroked my hair, her hands rough and bony. I knew you'd come. They told me you were dead. I told them to go to hell. She pulled away and looked me in the eyes. You have to be careful, Lizzie. They're desperate. Richard, he's done bad things, worse than you know. I know about the money, Grandma, I said. I know he stole your savings. She shook her head. Not just the money. He signed my name, on papers, for the house. He made me a co-signer without me knowing. If the house goes down, they take my pension too. She reached into the cushion of her chair and pulled out a small, tattered notebook. I wrote it down, she said, pressing it into my hand. Dates, times, Whenever he talked on the phone near my door, he thinks I'm deaf and crazy. I'm neither. I held the notebook like it was a holy relic. This was the final nail in the coffin. You're leaving with me tonight, I promised her. Not yet, she said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. Go eat their dinner.
Make them squirm. Make them pay. Then come back for me. I kissed her forehead. I will. I stood up, tucking the notebook into my pocket. I wiped my eyes. When I turned back to the door, the sadness was gone. Only the cold, calculating fury remained. I walked back out into the hallway to join the family that had tried to bury us both. I stood in the hallway for a moment after leaving Grandma Rose's room, composing myself. I could hear the murmur of their voices from the drawing room. They were arguing. She saw the bag, didn't she? It's at least 20 grand, Preston was saying. Keep your voice down, Richard hissed. Just stick to the script. We need her to sign the guarantor form. I don't see why we have to be nice to her, Linda whined. She thinks she's better than us.
Because we need the money, you idiot, Catherine snapped. I smiled. It was a dark, dangerous smile. They had just handed me their playbook. I walked back into the living room. The conversation died instantly. They all turned to look at me with plastered-on smiles. How was she? Catherine asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. Did she recognize you? She's been having such bad days lately. She thinks I'm the nurse, I lied smoothly. She kept asking for apple juice. Visibly relieved, Richard exhaled. See, I told you. Sad, very sad. We do our best to care for her, but it's a burden, a heavy financial burden. I'm sure, I said. Well, Richard clapped his hands. Dinner is served. Let's eat. We moved to the dining room. It was set with the good china, the Wedgwood set that I wasn't allowed to touch as a child. The chandelier above the table was missing a few crystals and looked dusty. I took the seat across from Richard. Preston sat next to me. Catherine and Linda sat opposite. The housekeeper, a woman I didn't recognize, brought out the appetizers. Shrimp cocktail. I stared at the bowl of pink crustaceans chilling on the ice. My throat tightened just looking at it. Is something wrong? Catherine asked, picking up her fork. I looked at her. I'm allergic to shellfish, Mother. Highly allergic. I went into anaphylactic shock when I was 10. You drove me to the ER. Catherine blinked. She genuinely didn't remember. Or worse, she didn't care enough to remember. Oh, she said, waving her hand dismissively. I thought you grew out of that. Just eat the salad then. I could die, I said flatly. Don't be dramatic, Richard grumbled. Just push it to the side. It's fresh shrimp, expensive. I pushed the bowl away. This was the level of their narcissism. My potential death was an inconvenience to their menu planning. So, Elizabeth, Preston said, shoving a shrimp into his mouth, this company of yours, what do you actually do? Vex computers? I own a logistics firm, I explained, keeping my words short. We use artificial intelligence to optimize shipping routes for global supply chains. Preston scoffed. Sounds boring. I'm in venture capital. Preston is an entrepreneur, Catherine beamed. He has so many big ideas.
He's just waiting for the right funding. Gambling on crypto isn't venture capital, Preston, I said dryly. Preston dropped his fork. It's not gambling, it's the future. You wouldn't understand. You're practically a boomer in the tech world. I'm 34, Preston, and my boomer tech company just acquired a competitor for 9 figures. The table went silent. The number hung in the air. 9 figures. Richard's eyes lit up. Greed washed over his face, replacing the irritation. 9 figures? He repeated. Well, that's impressive. Hard work pays off, I said, taking a sip of the wine I had brought myself, a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir that Arthur had packed. I didn't trust their tap water. We've always known you had potential, Aunt Linda lied, leaning forward. Even when you were struggling, we prayed for you. Did you pray before or after you told the church group I was a heroin addict? I asked. Linda choked on her wine. I never said that. Mrs. Higgins seems to think you did, I said calmly. She was quite surprised to see me alive today. Mrs. Higgins is a gossip. Richard slammed his hand on the table. Enough of the past. We are here to look forward. He signaled to the housekeeper to clear the plates. The main course was brought out, roast beef. At least that wouldn't kill me. As we ate, I let them talk. I let them brag about things they didn't have. Richard talked about the expansion of the factory, which was shutting down. Catherine talked about her charity work, which was just lunch with other idle wives. It was a circus act, a performance of a wealthy, happy family, and I was the audience they were trying to con. I glanced at my watch, 7:45 p.m. Arthur would be waiting for my text. I touched the pocket where Grandma Rose's diary sat. I touched the phone where the foreclosure documents were queued up. The tension was building. I could feel Richard getting ready to make his move. He was shifting in his chair, clearing his throat, glancing at Catherine. "Elizabeth," Richard started, putting down his knife. "The reason we asked you here, aside from missing you, of course, is that we have an opportunity. Here it comes." "An opportunity?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Yes," Richard said, leaning back and steepling his fingers. "The Sterling name, it carries weight in this town. It's a legacy, and I want you to be a part of it again." He paused for dramatic effect. "I'm willing to bring you onto the board of directors for the family company," he said benevolently, "and we can discuss reintegrating you into the will." "Wow," I said deadpan. "That sounds generous." "It is," Catherine added. "We're willing to forgive the past. We're willing to let you be a Sterling again." "But," Richard continued, "businesses have cash flow cycles. Currently, we are in a tight cycle. To bring you on board, to make this official, we need a small injection of capital, a buy-in, if you will." "A buy-in," I repeated. "Yes," Richard said. $5 million. A loan, of course, or an investment. We can structure it however you like. It will clear up some minor liabilities and position us for the next quarter." $5 million. He wanted $5 million to pay off debts he had likely accrued gambling or living beyond his means, and in exchange, he would give me a seat on the board of a sinking ship. "And if I say no?" I asked. Richard's smile faltered. The menace returned to his eyes. "Well," he said coldly, "then you walk out that door again, and this time you stay dead. No family, no legacy, nothing." He really thought that was a threat. He thought his approval was the oxygen I needed to breathe. I looked at him, then at Catherine, then at Preston. I started to laugh. It started as a chuckle and grew into a full, resonant laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "What's so funny?" Preston demanded. "You," I said, wiping a tear from my eye. "You think I want to buy into this? You think I want to be a Sterling?" I stopped laughing. My face went stone cold. "I didn't come here to invest, Richard, and I didn't come here to be forgiven." I pulled my phone out and sent a single text to Arthur. "Check, please." "I came to collect," I said. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, thick enough to choke on. The air in the dining room shifted from awkward to hostile in a heartbeat. "Collect?" Richard repeated, his face reddening. "What are you talking about? You owe us. We raised you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. "And then you kicked me out under it," I countered. "But that's emotional debt. I'm talking about actual debt, financial debt." Just then, the front door opened. The heavy footsteps of Arthur Vance echoed in the hallway. "Who is that?" Catherine shrieked, standing up. "You can't just have people barging in here." Arthur walked into the dining room. He looked out of place among the faded floral wallpaper, a grim reaper in a Tom Ford suit. He carried a black leather briefcase. "Good evening," Arthur said, his voice smooth and professional. "I apologize for the interruption. I am Arthur Vance, Elizabeth's legal counsel." "A lawyer?" Richard sputtered. "You brought a lawyer to Christmas dinner?" "I find it's best to have witnesses when dealing with criminals," I said, taking a sip of wine. "Criminals?" Preston stood up. knocking his chair over. "Who are you calling criminals?" "Sit down, Preston," I commanded. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the authority of a CEO used to commanding rooms of 1,000 people. He hesitated, then sat. Arthur placed the briefcase on the table, pushing aside a tureen of gravy. He clicked the latches open. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Let's start with the small stuff," I said. Arthur handed me a document. 12 years ago, I began, reading from the paper. A life insurance policy was paid out by Liberty Mutual, policy number 883902. Insured, Elizabeth Ann Sterling. Beneficiaries, Richard and Catherine Sterling. I looked up. Catherine's face had gone pale white. Her hand went to her throat. "You told the insurance company I died," I said. "You forged a death certificate. You collected $500,000. It was a mistake," Richard stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "We thought we hadn't heard from you. We assumed—" "You assumed I was dead, so you cashed in?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's wire fraud, Richard. That's insurance fraud. That's 10 to 20 years in federal prison." "You wouldn't," Aunt Linda gasped. "You wouldn't send your own parents to jail." "I'm just getting started," I said. Arthur handed me the second document, Grandma Rose's notebook. "I visited Grandma Rose," I said. "She's not crazy, by the way. She's actually quite lucid. Lucid enough to keep a diary of every time you forced her to sign a document she couldn't read." I held up the tattered notebook. "You stole her pension," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "You drained her savings, and you used her Social Security checks to pay for— what was it, Arthur?" "Country club dues and the lease on a 2023 Porsche Macan," Arthur recited without looking up. All eyes turned to Preston. He shrank into a seat. "I needed a car for networking," Preston whined. "You can't show up to meetings in a Toyota." "You stole from an 85-year-old woman to buy a car," I said, looking at him with pure disgust. "You are parasitic." "This is absurd," Richard shouted, trying to regain control. "So what? We had some financial maneuvering to do. Families help each other. We needed the money to keep the house." "Ah, the house," I said. "The crown jewel." I signaled Arthur. This was the big one. Arthur pulled out a thick stack of papers, bound in a red folder. He slid it across the table toward Richard. "What is this?" Richard asked, staring at the folder like it was a bomb. "Open it," I said. Richard opened the folder. He read the first page. His hands started to shake. He read the second page. He dropped the folder. "Vanguard Holdings," Richard whispered. You know them?" "I am them," I said. The room stopped. "What?" Catherine breathed. "Vanguard Holdings is a subsidiary of Phoenix Capital," I explained slowly, enjoying every syllable. "I am the CEO and majority shareholder of Phoenix Capital. When your bank bundled your toxic debt and sold it off 3 months ago, I bought it. All of it." I leaned forward. "I own your mortgage, Richard. I own the business loans. I own the liens on the factory. I own the credit card debt." I looked around the room. "I own this table. I own that chandelier. I own the chair you are sitting in." Richard looked like he was having a stroke. His face turned a deep, unhealthy shade of purple. You bought my debt?" "I bought my freedom," I corrected. "And now I'm calling it in." "You can't do that," Preston said, his voice trembling. "We're family." "You ceased to be family when you buried an empty box and called it me," I snapped. "So what happens now?" Catherine asked, tears finally streaming down her face. Tears of fear, not remorse. "Are you going to evict us? On Christmas?" I looked at them, the mighty Sterlings, reduced to trembling debtors in their own dining room. "Arthur," I said, "show them the options." Arthur stood up and smoothed his suit jacket. He didn't look at them with pity. He looked at them with the detached efficiency of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. "You have 2 options," Arthur stated clearly. He held up one finger. "Option 1, We proceed with immediate foreclosure. We file the evidence of insurance fraud and elder abuse with the district attorney tomorrow morning. You will be evicted within 30 days. You will likely face federal prosecution. Given your ages and the severity of the crimes, you will likely die in prison. A sob escaped Aunt Linda. I didn't sign anything. I just knew about it. I shouldn't go to jail. Conspiracy is also a crime, Linda, Arthur noted dryly. And option 2? Richard croaked. He looked defeated. The bluster was gone. He was just an old man caught in his own trap. Option 2, I took over. You sign a full confession regarding the insurance fraud, which I will keep in a safe as leverage. You sign over full, uncontested guardianship of Rose Sterling to me immediately. And you sign a quit-claim deed, transferring ownership of this property to me voluntarily in exchange for debt forgiveness. You want the house? Catherine cried. But where will we go? I'm feeling generous, I said. If you sign option 2, I will give you a cash settlement of $350,000, total, for all of you. $350,000? Richard gasped. That's nothing. This house is worth $2 million. This house is underwater by $4 million, I corrected. And you have no equity. $350,000 is enough to buy a condo in Boca Raton and retire. It's more than you gave me when you threw me out. I got 0. And we leave when? Preston asked. He was already doing the math on his share of the money. You leave tonight, I said. Tonight? Catherine shrieked. But it's Christmas Eve. Consider it a holiday miracle that you aren't leaving in handcuffs, I said. I pulled a pen from my purse, the same Mont Blanc pen I used to sign billion-dollar deals. I set it on the table next to the documents. The clock is ticking, I said. Arthur has the police on speed dial. If those papers aren't signed in 5 minutes, he hits call. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Then, movement. It wasn't Richard. It wasn't Catherine. It was Preston. He lunged for the pen. I'm signing, Preston said, grabbing the document Arthur held out. I'm not going to jail for Dad's fraud. I want my cut of the $350. Preston, Catherine gasped. How could you? Shut up, Mom, Preston muttered, scribbling his signature. It's over. Liz won. Next was Aunt Linda. I'm not family, she blubbered, grabbing the pen from Preston. I mean, I am, but not immediate family. I shouldn't be involved. I'll sign. Just give me $5,000 and I'll go. Watching the rats flee the sinking ship was satisfying, but also deeply sad. This was the loyalty Richard had bragged about? Now it was just Richard and Catherine. Richard looked at me. His eyes were watery. I am your father, he whispered. Then act like it, I said. Save yourself, because I'm not saving you. He looked at the papers. Then he looked at the foreclosure notice. He realized he had no cards left to play. The hubris was gone. With a shaking hand, he took the pen. He signed. Catherine followed suit, weeping loudly about her social standing and what the neighbors would think. Done, Arthur said, gathering the papers. The wire transfer for the funds will be initiated within the hour. You have until midnight to vacate the premises with your personal effects. Anything left behind becomes the property of Vanguard Holdings. I stood up. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, like I had just taken a shower after a long, dirty day. Where are you going? Richard asked, slumping in his chair. I'm going to get the real head of this family, I said. I walked back to the guest room. I unlocked the door. Grandma Rose was waiting, her coat already on, a small suitcase by her feet. She knew. Is it done? She asked. It's done, I said. We're going home, Grandma. My home, in California. It's warm there, and there are oak trees. She smiled, revealing her dentures. Good. I never liked this house anyway. Too much draft. I helped her up. We walked slowly down the hallway. When we passed the dining room, the family was still sitting there, stunned, arguing over how to split the money. They didn't even look up as we walked out the front door. We stepped into the cold night air. The driver opened the door of the SUV. As I helped Grandma into the car, I looked back at the house one last time. I saw Mrs. Higgins still watching from her porch across the street. I gave her a little wave. Then I got in the car. To the airport, I told the driver. As we drove away, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. A pile of rubble and a check for $350,000, a cheap price to pay for my soul. The silence inside the SUV as we pulled away from 42 Elm Street was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that follows a massive explosion, where the dust is settling and you are checking your limbs to make sure you are still whole. I held Grandma Rose's hand. Her skin was paper thin, spotted with age, but her grip was surprisingly firm. She wasn't looking back at the house. She was looking out the window at the passing streetlights of Oakbrook, watching the town she had lived in for 50 years blur into a streak of yellow and black. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She turned to me, and for the first time in decades, I saw a genuine smile reach her eyes. It wasn't the guarded look she used to wear around my father, or the fearful look she wore when my mother entered the room. It was pure relief. "I'm better than okay, Lizzie," she rasped. "I feel like I just broke out of Alcatraz," I chuckled, the tension in my chest finally beginning to uncoil. "Well, the warden won't be chasing us. He signed the release papers." We arrived at the small regional airport where the jet was waiting. The pilot, a man named Davis, who had been with me for 5 years, was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't blink an eye at the sight of an elderly woman in a mismatched coat and fuzzy slippers being helped onto a $40 million aircraft. That was the thing about my team. They knew loyalty was the only currency that mattered. As we settled into the cabin, Grandma Rose looked around, running her hand over the cream leather armrest. "This is nicer than your grandfather's Buick," she noted dryly. "A little faster, too," I said, buckling her in. Once we were airborne, climbing above the cloud layer and leaving the Midwestern winter behind, Arthur Vance moved from his seat across the aisle. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the tattered notebook Grandma had given me earlier. "Elizabeth," Arthur said, his tone serious, "you need to see this." I took the notebook. The cover was worn, the spiral binding bent. It looked like a cheap grocery list pad, the kind you buy at a dollar store. But the contents were explosive. I opened to the first marked page. The handwriting was shaky, but legible. June 12th, 2015. Richard arguing on the phone with the bank. He told them I was dead. He said the pension checks would stop coming if they closed the account, so he had to transfer the funds to his personal LLC immediately. He forged my signature on the transfer slip. I saw him practice it on a napkin at breakfast. I flipped the page. October 4th, 2018. Catherine came in. She took my diamond engagement ring, the one your grandfather gave me in 1955. She told me she was taking it to be cleaned. I heard her tell Linda later that she pawned it to pay for Preston's bail when he got arrested for that DUI. My stomach churned. I looked at Grandma Rose. She was sipping a cup of tea the flight attendant had brought her, looking out at the stars. She had sat in that room day after day, treated like a senile invalid, all while documenting their crimes with the precision of a forensic accountant. "They sold your ring?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't look away from the window. "It was just a rock, Lizzie. The memory of your grandfather is in my head. They can't pawn that." "We're going to get it back," I vowed. "I don't care where it is. I have a team that finds lost cargo ships in the middle of the Pacific. I can find a pawned ring." I continued reading. The diary was a chronicle of betrayal. It detailed how they used the money from my life insurance payout not to pay off the mortgage, but to fund a lavish European vacation they took 6 months after my funeral. It described how Richard had laughed when the neighbors brought casseroles, mocking their sympathy. November 2nd, 2012. Mrs. Higgins brought a lasagna. Richard threw it in the trash as soon as she left. He said, "At least the brat finally contributed something to this household, a tax-free payout." I closed the notebook. I felt sick.
physically ill. I had thought my anger had peaked at the dinner table. I thought I had emptied the tank of my rage. But reading this, knowing the depth of their malice, I realized I had been too kind. $350,000 was too much. They deserved the street. "You're thinking about going back," Arthur said, watching my face. He knew me too well. "I'm thinking I should have let you call the district attorney," I admitted.
"The deal is done," Arthur reminded me. "But remember, Elizabeth, the check comes with conditions. If they violate the non-disclosure agreement, if they try to contact you, if they speak to the press, we claw it all back. And based on what I saw tonight, they will turn on each other long before the money runs out." I looked at Grandma Rose. She had fallen asleep, her head resting against the plush pillow, her mouth slightly open. She looked peaceful. For the first time in years, she wasn't sleeping with one eye open. "You're right," I whispered. "The punishment isn't prison. The punishment is that they have to live with themselves, stripped of the one thing that mattered to them, their status." I leaned back and closed my eyes. The hum of the jet engines was a soothing lullaby. I thought about the girl who had left that town 15 years ago, broken and penniless. And I thought about the woman returning to California tonight. The cord was cut. The house was gone. The parents were fired. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I deleted the contact named birth giver. Then I deleted sperm donor. Then Preston. "Arthur," I said softly, without opening my eyes. "Yes, Elizabeth?" "When the wire transfer clears tomorrow, send a specialized cleaning crew to the house. I want them to find that ring before the movers pack a single box. Consider it done." I drifted off to sleep somewhere over Colorado, holding the hand of the only Sterling who actually mattered. The nightmare was over. The resurrection was complete. The next 30 days were a masterclass in bureaucratic destruction. I didn't go back to Oakbrook personally. I had no need to breathe that stagnant air again. But I watched the demolition of the Sterling legacy from the comfort of my glass-walled office in Napa Valley. Arthur had set up a digital dashboard for me to monitor the transition. It was almost clinical. I could see the bank transfers, the title changes, and the reports from the property management team we had hired to oversee the eviction. But the most satisfying intelligence didn't come from lawyers or spreadsheets. It came from Mrs. Higgins. I had asked Arthur to send Mrs. Higgins a gift basket, a massive arrangement of gourmet cheeses, wines, and chocolates, with a note thanking her for her kindness over the years. Included in the card was a private number she could call if she noticed anything suspicious at the property during the transition. Mrs. Higgins, bless her heart, treated this as a deputization by the FBI. She called Arthur's paralegal almost daily with updates. Day 3. The moving trucks arrived, the report read. Richard was screaming at the movers on the front lawn because they wouldn't pack his golf clubs without a specialized box. The neighbors were watching. He looked very red. Day 7. Catherine tried to sell the piano. A buyer came by, but there was a shouting match. Apparently, she tried to sell it for $10,000, but the buyer pointed out it was out of tune and had water damage. She ended up crying on the porch. Day 14. Preston was seen loading his venture capital equipment, which looked suspiciously like a gaming computer and a VR headset, into the back of his Porsche. The repo man showed up an hour later and took the Porsche. Preston had to unload his computer onto the sidewalk. He threw a tantrum and kicked a fire hydrant. I read these reports while sitting on my terrace, overlooking the vineyard. Grandma Rose was usually sitting nearby, reading a book or simply watching the birds. Whenever I shared a particularly juicy detail, she would just shake her head and say, "Karma has a long memory, Lizzie." The auction was the final nail in the coffin of their reputation. Since the house was underwater and they had signed over the deed, the contents that they couldn't take to their downsized life were sold off to recoup some of the losses for Vanguard Holdings. In a small town like Oakbrook, an estate auction at the Sterling Mansion was the social event of the season. I watched the live stream of the auction. It was brutal. People walked through the house. Strangers, neighbors, people my parents had looked down on for decades, touching their things, judging their taste. I saw the dining room table, the site of our final confrontation, sell for a fraction of what Richard claimed it was worth. "Sold to the gentleman in the back for $400, the auctioneer boomed. $400 for the altar of Richard's ego. Then came the rumors. The truth about my death had spread like wildfire. Mrs. Higgins had been busy. The narrative shifted overnight. The Sterlings weren't the tragic parents of a deceased daughter. They were the frauds who had lied to the whole town. One report from the property manager stood out. Incident report, day 25. Subject, Catherine Sterling. Details, Mrs. Sterling attempted to enter the country club. Her membership had been flagged as delinquent. When she tried to make a scene, the manager informed her that her membership was revoked, not just for non-payment, but for violation of the club's moral conduct clause. The story of the insurance fraud has circulated among the board members. She was escorted off the premises by security. I felt a pang of pity, sharp and brief, like a paper cut. My mother loved that club. It was her entire identity. To be banned from it was a fate worse than death for her. But then I remembered the damp room where she had kept Grandma Rose, and the pity evaporated. The final day of the 30-day window arrived. The keys were to be handed over by 5 p.m. I got a call from Arthur. "It's done," he said. "The house is empty. We've changed the locks. The security system has been updated with new codes." "Did they go quietly?" I asked. "Not exactly," Arthur replied. "Richard tried to take the copper piping from the basement. He claimed it was an improvement he had paid for. The police had to explain to him that stripping the plumbing is a felony. He left without the pipes." "And the settlement check?" "Cashed immediately," Arthur said. "They split it 3 ways, just as you predicted. Unevenly. Richard took half, claiming head of household rights. Catherine got 30%. Preston and Linda fought over the scraps. It was undignified." I hung up the phone. I walked into the living room where Grandma Rose was knitting a scarf. The California sun was streaming in, bathing her in golden light. She looked 10 years younger than the woman I had found in that dark room a month ago. "They're gone, Grandma," I said. "The house is ours." She didn't look up from her knitting. "It's just a building, Lizzie. It was never a home. Not really. Not after you left." "I'm going to bulldoze it," I said suddenly. The idea had been forming in the back of my mind, but saying it aloud made it real. Rose stopped knitting. She looked at me. "Bulldoze it?" "Yes," I said. "I don't want to sell it. I don't want someone else living in that bad energy. I want to tear it down. I want to donate the land to the town, turn it into a park, a community garden, something that actually grows." A slow smile spread across her face. "A garden," she mused. "With oak trees?" "Lots of oak trees," I promised. "I like that," she said, picking up her needles again. "Bury the rot, plant a seed. That's the only way to fix things." I made the call 5 minutes later. The Sterling mansion, the monument to my father's greed and my mother's vanity, would be reduced to dust within the week, and in its place, flowers would bloom. It was the perfect poetic justice. They wanted to bury me. Instead, I buried their legacy and planted a garden on top of it. 6 months passed. The seasons changed from the crisp winter to a vibrant, blooming spring in Napa. My life had settled into a rhythm of peace I hadn't known was possible. But while my world was expanding, the world of the Sterlings was shrinking to the size of a postage stamp. I didn't actively hunt for information about them anymore. I didn't need to. Desperation has a way of making noise. The first domino to fall was Preston. He had taken his share of the settlement, roughly $40,000 after Richard's tax, and moved to Miami. He posted all about it on Instagram, which my assistant monitored for security reasons. He rented a flashy condo, leased another car, and went all in on a guaranteed crypto scheme promoted by some influencer. It took exactly 8 weeks for him to lose everything. The report from Arthur was brief. Preston Sterling arrested in Miami-Dade County. Charges, disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. He was trying to skip out on a bar tab. He called you collect from the county jail. "Did you accept the charges?" I asked Arthur. "Of course not," Arthur replied. I blocked the number. He has a public defender. Preston, the golden boy who mocked my work ethic, was now learning the hard way that the world doesn't hand out participation trophies to broke narcissists. Then there was Aunt Linda. She had stayed in Oakbrook, hoping to distance herself from the scandal. But small towns don't forgive easily. She was fired from her job at the bank. Nobody trusts a teller involved in insurance fraud, even if she wasn't the mastermind. She ended up moving 3 towns over, working the night shift at a convenience store. But the fate of Richard and Catherine was the most tragic, in the Shakespearean sense of the word. They had moved to Boca Raton, just as I suggested. They bought a small 2-bedroom condo in a 55-plus community. It wasn't a slum, but for 2 people used to a 4,000-square-foot Victorian mansion with a housekeeper, it was a prison cell. Arthur kept tabs on their financial status, strictly to ensure they didn't try to violate the NDA to sell their story for cash. They are miserable, Arthur told me during our quarterly review. The neighbors hate them. Why? I asked, sipping a glass of iced tea. Because Richard tries to act like the HOA president, even though he's been there for 4 months. He criticizes everyone's lawns. And Catherine? Well, she complains that the community pool isn't up to her standards. But the cracks in their marriage, which had always been papered over with money and pretension, were now wide-open chasms. Without a common enemy, me, or a common distraction, maintaining their social status, they turned on each other. The divorce filing hit the public record in May. Petitioner, Catherine Sterling. Respondent, Richard Sterling. Reason, irreconcilable differences. It wasn't a clean break. They fought over everything. The remaining cash from the settlement was being burned up by divorce lawyers who saw them coming a mile away. They fought over the furniture. They fought over the dog. They even fought over who got to keep the rewards points on the credit card I had paid off. It's a war of attrition, Arthur observed. By the time the divorce is final, they will both be destitute. I thought I would feel happy about this. I thought I would pop a bottle of champagne. But honestly, I just felt a profound sense of waste. 2 people who had every advantage, every opportunity to be happy, to love their children, to build a real legacy, and they threw it all away for the appearance of wealth. One afternoon, a package arrived at my gate. It had no return address, but the postmark was from Boca Raton. I opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in a cheap paper napkin, was a small velvet box. I opened the box. It was Grandma Rosa's diamond ring. There was no note, no apology, no I love you, just the ring. I realized then that this was Catherine's final play. She wasn't sending it out of remorse. She was sending it because she knew Richard wanted to sell it to pay his lawyer, and she would rather I have it than let him win. Even her act of restitution was an act of spite against her husband. I walked out to the garden where Grandma Rose was pruning her roses. Her hands were stronger now, her color healthy. Grandma, I said softly, look. I held out the ring. She gasped. She dropped her shears and took the ring with trembling hands. She slid it onto her finger. It still fit perfectly, finding the groove it had worn over 50 years of marriage. She looked at it, tears streaming down her face. Then she looked at me. She sent it? Grandma asked. Yes. She must be really desperate, Grandma said, wiping her eyes. Or really angry. Both, I said. They're divorcing. Grandma nodded slowly. She looked at the ring, watching the sunlight catch the diamond. You know, Lizzie, she said, when your grandfather gave me this, he said, Rose, we might not always have money, but as long as we have honor, we're rich. Richard and Catherine, they chased the money and lost the honor. Now they have neither. And we have both, I said, putting my arm around her shoulders. We have more than that, she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. We have the truth, and we have peace. That's better than $1 billion. I looked out over the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. Far away, in a cramped condo in Florida, 2 old people were screaming at each other over a toaster. In a jail cell in Miami, my brother was realizing he was nobody. But here, on this hill, the air was sweet. "Come on, Grandma," I said. "Let's go inside. It's getting chilly, and I think Arthur is making pasta." "With extra garlic?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "With all the garlic you want," I promised. "Nobody is here to tell us what to eat anymore." Life has a funny way of circling back. They say you can't go home again, and maybe that's true, but you can certainly build a new one. It's been a year since the dinner, a year since I bought my parents' debt and freed myself from their shadow. We received a letter from the mayor of Oakbrook last week. The demolition of the house was complete. The Elizabeth and Rose Sterling Community Garden was officially open. The photos showed children playing on the grass where the formal dining room used to be. They showed families having picnics where Richard used to scream about the lawn maintenance. I framed the photo and hung it in the hallway. It was the only picture of the Sterling estate I allowed in my house. Grandma Rose turned 86 yesterday. We threw a massive party. Not a stuffy dinner with shrimp cocktails and polite conversation, but a real party. We had a taco truck, we had a live band playing jazz. We invited the staff, the gardeners, Arthur and his husband, and even Mrs. Higgins, whom we flew out first class. Mrs. Higgins spent the whole night drinking margaritas and telling anyone who would listen how she was the double agent who helped bring down the Sterling Empire. Watching Grandma actually dance, with Arthur, I felt a knot in my chest loosen that I hadn't realized was still there. For so long, I defined myself by what I wasn't. I wasn't the daughter they wanted. I wasn't the failure they predicted. I wasn't the victim they created. But now, I knew who I was. I was the woman who saved the one person worth saving. I walked away from the party for a moment, stepping out onto the balcony to look at the stars. The night was quiet, the music drifting out softly. I thought about the concept of revenge. People say it's a dish best served cold. They say it's sweet, but they're wrong. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's a surgical procedure. It's cutting out the rot so the healthy tissue can survive. I didn't destroy my family because I hated them. I destroyed them because they were already dead inside, and they were trying to drag us down into the grave with them. I took a sip of my wine. It was a Cabernet from my own vineyard. It was rich, complex, and had a finish that lingered. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it. It was a notification from LinkedIn. "Preston Sterling viewed your profile." I smiled. He was out of jail, probably sitting in an internet cafe or a library, looking at the life he could have been part of if he had just been a decent human being. I didn't block him. I wanted him to look. I wanted him to see. Let him witness the empire that the dropout built. That was the best punishment of all. A hand touched my shoulder. It was Grandma Rose. She had a shawl wrapped around her, and her face was flushed with happiness. "What are you doing out here all alone?" she asked. "Just thinking," I said. "About everything." "Stop thinking," she scolded gently. "Thinking is for business hours. Living is for right now." She pointed to the sky. "You see that star? The bright one?" "North Star?" I guessed. "No, that's Venus," she corrected. "It shines the brightest because it's closest to us. You don't have to be a distant sun to shine, Lizzie. You just have to be close to the things that matter." I hugged her tight. She smelled of lavender and vanilla, the smell of safety. "They called me cold," I whispered. "They said I was heartless for evicting them." Grandma pulled back and looked me in the eye. "You didn't evict them, honey. You just stopped paying their rent. There's a difference. You wouldn't warm a snake that already bit you once, would you?" "No," I said. "I wouldn't." "Exactly. Now come inside. They're cutting the cake, and if you don't get a piece, Mrs. Higgins is going to eat it all." We walked back inside, arm in arm. As I crossed the threshold, I realized something profound. The resurrection I had told Arthur about wasn't about bringing Elizabeth Sterling back from the dead. That girl was gone. This was about the birth of someone new, someone who didn't need their approval, someone who didn't need their name. I looked at the room full of people laughing, eating, and celebrating. None of them shared my DNA, except Rose. But this was family. Family isn't whose blood runs in your veins. It's who you'd bleed for. And for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who would bleed for me too. I closed the glass door behind me, shutting out the cold night, and stepped into the warmth. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way to the end. I am truly grateful for your time and your heart. If you've made it this far, you are part of the 1% who truly cares about deep stories. Please, type the letter A in the comments below so I know you are one of the special ones who finished the journey with me. And if this story made you feel something, anger, joy, relief, share your thoughts. I read every single one. Don't forget to check out the other videos on the channel for more stories of justice and resilience. See you in the next one.